The snow was falling harder than ever, thick flakes dancing like feathers across the windshield as Emma Carter gripped the steering wheel with cold, trembling hands. Her breath fogged the glass, her vision blurred by exhaustion and the remnants of tears she hadn't let fall. She was alone now, truly alone. Boston was behind her, and so was the life she'd built for 6 years with a man who had promised her everything but left her with nothing but betrayal. Not just from him, but from her closest friend. The ring never came. The apology was weak, and now the silence screamed louder than their lies. Maple Hollow was supposed to be quiet, a place to disappear, to forget, to hide. She'd rented a small weathered house online, nothing glamorous but enough to retreat into. When she finally pulled up to the rusted garage door, Emma sat in the parked car, fingers hovering above the keys, frozen not just from the cold but from fear of what came next. Not fear of someone, but fear of feeling again, of rebuilding, of trusting. What she didn't know, however, was that this night, this very first night, would not be quiet at all. The sound came faintly at first, a scrape like metal on cement. At first she told herself it was just the wind. But when the noise repeated, louder this time, instinct kicked in. Grabbing a bat from beside the door, a remnant of her childhood, Emma stepped cautiously into the snow, face stung by wind, heart racing. The garage door was ajar. Inside stood a man, hunched, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing. He raised his hands, voice rasping with cold. "Just one night," he pleaded. "I needed to get out of the storm." Against every protective instinct and for reasons she couldn't explain, Emma let him stay. She didn't ask for his name, he didn't offer it. But something in his quiet, worn presence softened her guarded heart. Over the days that followed, her fear gave way to cautious curiosity. He helped without being asked, fixed what was broken, spoke little but with meaning. And slowly Emma began to smile again, real smiles, the kind she hadn't felt in months. What she didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that this man was not just a wanderer or a stranger in need. He was someone the world had once known well, a man who had lost everything by choice, a man who saw her in a way no one ever had. And though he would leave just as quietly as he came, he would leave behind something she didn't know she'd lost herself. In the sleepy town of Maple Hollow, amid a storm that seemed to swallow the world whole, a quiet act of kindness ignited a chain of events no one could have anticipated. Evelyn, a woman recently betrayed and broken by a life she no longer recognized, had come to this quiet place to disappear. She wasn't looking for redemption or miracles, only solitude. But that changed the night she heard the scrape of metal from her garage. What should have been a terrifying intrusion turned into a flickering moment of compassion. There stood a man, weather-worn and hunched beneath layers of tattered clothes, eyes hollow yet oddly gentle. She could have turned him away, but something in his voice stopped her. One night he had pleaded, and that's all she gave, or so she thought. What began as a single act of mercy unfolded into something deeper. Over the next few days, Evelyn found her world quietly rearranged. Her sidewalk was cleared before she woke. A leaky tap she'd ignored for weeks was fixed without a word. Her cold house, long stripped of laughter and warmth, now carried the scent of cocoa in the morning and echoes of conversations that felt surprisingly easy. The stranger, who never offered a name, showed no signs of threat, only gratitude and a quiet dignity that challenged every assumption she'd made about people down on their luck. He fixed what was broken, not just around the house, but in her. He saw her, really saw her, like no one had in years. With every sunrise, she began to look forward to his presence, the thoughtful way he listened, the shared silences that didn't demand to be filled, the stories he half-revealed with every word about art and music and pain. Evelyn was rediscovering not just trust, but fragments of herself she thought were lost. But just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, leaving behind a folded scarf and a drawing so personal it stole the breath from her chest. A letter followed, mysterious and unsigned, leading her to a gallery in New York where her image, her very essence, was framed on every wall. The stranger was no ordinary man. He was Victor Hale, a once famous artist who had vanished from the spotlight and into the shadows of obscurity. Yet it was Evelyn who brought him back, not through fame or fortune, but through kindness. And as she stood under the soft glow of gallery lights, surrounded by paintings born from her quiet strength, she finally understood. Sometimes the smallest acts spark the greatest transformations, and the simplest choices, like opening a door, can lead to love, healing, and rediscovery. As the bitter winds of Maple Hollow swept across the snow-laden streets, Evelyn found herself not just braving the cold of winter, but the colder ache of heartbreak. She had come to this forgotten corner of the world with no expectations, only a hope to disappear. But life has a strange way of nudging open doors when we least expect it. One of those doors was the creaky garage behind her rented house, and the one who walked through it was a man she didn't know, didn't understand, and at first didn't trust. Yet she let him stay, and that choice, born from instinct more than reason, transformed both their lives. He never gave a name, and she never asked. They moved in a quiet rhythm. She brewed the morning coffee, he fixed the faucet. She read in silence, he cleared the snow. Slowly, this stranger became a presence, steady, kind, and calm. He didn't take up space, but he filled it. And in filling it, he filled the cracks in her life she didn't know still ached. She began to speak more freely. He listened with intent. His words were measured, thoughtful. There was no arrogance, no bitterness, just a soft sadness, as if he had once been someone and lost that someone along the way. Evelyn, in her guarded way, never asked for more than he offered, but the unspoken between them grew louder with every quiet moment shared. They never touched, yet intimacy bloomed, rooted not in grand gestures but in a shared understanding that both had been hurt, both were healing. And then he vanished, just as he'd come, without warning, without goodbye. All that remained was a scarf she had once handed him and a sketch, a drawing of her, not just of her face but of her essence, the woman she'd tried to bury beneath grief and disappointment. He had seen her and captured her without asking. That image shook her. It reminded her that even when she felt invisible, she had been seen. Weeks passed, then a letter arrived. No return address, no pleasantries. Just a simple message. If you still have the drawing, bring it. V. And so she went. What she found at the gallery stole her breath. Canvases lined the walls, each bearing her image, each painting reflecting emotions and moments so intimate she couldn't believe anyone had witnessed them. But he had. And now the world was seeing her too. The stranger, now revealed as Victor Hale, a once revered artist, stood before the crowd, eyes locked on hers. He didn't speak of art or acclaim. He spoke of her, of how her kindness brought him back from the edge, of how she made him see again. And for Evelyn, standing there under the spotlight of memory and emotion, it was no longer about fame, mystery, or artistry. It was about a connection forged in silence, born in a storm and carried by truth. What started as a night of charity had bloomed into something enduring. And in the echoes of his voice, the softness of his gaze, and the stillness of her own heart, she knew, somehow, some way, they had saved each other. It was only meant to be one night, just a simple act of compassion during a blizzard in a quiet town. Evelyn, still raw from betrayal and loss, had no plans to let anyone else into her heart, let alone into her garage. But when a disheveled man, cold, silent, eyes sunken with sorrow, appeared in the shadows of her new home, something shifted. She let him in. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself it was charity. But in truth, it was something deeper, an instinctual recognition of pain. And over the next few days, the fragile barrier between two broken souls began to thaw like snow melting in spring sunlight. The man, quiet, thoughtful, helpful, never offered his name, but his actions spoke louder than any introduction. He cleared snow, fixed faucets, brought cocoa to her doorstep. He didn't take up space, he respected it. He didn't speak much, he listened. Evelyn found herself surprised by how easily their lives began to entwine. Over breakfast conversations and shared silences on the back porch, they built something unspoken, trust. What stood out wasn't his effort to impress, but his quiet presence. She never pressed for his story, yet he listened intently to hers, and somehow, without warning, he became her comfort. Until the morning she woke to find him gone, no explanation, no goodbye, just a folded scarf and a drawing, one that captured her not just in form, but in essence. She wept, Not because he'd left, but because in those few brief days he had seen her more clearly than anyone had in years. It wasn't long before the truth followed, a letter, an invitation, and a journey back to the world he had once belonged to. The gallery was filled with paintings, and every canvas revealed her. Her strength, her stillness, her vulnerability, immortalized in color and light. The man she had known as a homeless stranger was, in fact, Vincent Hale, a once renowned artist who had vanished from fame. But there, beneath the chandeliers, he looked only at her. And when he spoke to the crowd, he did not tell the story of his art. He told the story of her, of a woman who, without knowing his past, had offered him shelter, of how her quiet compassion had helped him remember what it meant to feel. He did not glorify his talent, he honored her humanity. And in that moment, Evelyn realized it had never really been about paintings. It was about healing, about seeing and being seen. She stood beneath the lights, surrounded by strangers who now knew her face, but only one man truly knew her soul. Later that night, on a snowy street corner, he found her again, not as a muse, not as a symbol, but as a woman he cared for. He handed her another drawing, this one of them together, and confessed not the brilliance of his art, but the fragility of his heart. And in the stillness of that winter night, Evelyn embraced him, not for who he had been, but for who he had become beside her. Because in the end, the story was never just about a man finding his art again. It was about two people, wounded, uncertain, finding their way back to love, starting in the most unlikely of places, a dusty old garage in a snowy Vermont town. In the quiet stillness of early morning, Evelyn stood motionless in the doorway of her garage, the bitter cold nipping at her skin while her heart ached with a hollow realization. He was gone. Vincent, the quiet, unassuming man she had let stay just for one night, had disappeared without a word, without even a sound. Yet he hadn't left her empty-handed. On the crate where he used to sit, folded with care, was the scarf she'd given him and a single sheet of thick paper weighed down by a stone. Her trembling fingers reached for the drawing, and as she unfolded it, her breath caught. There she was, portrayed in soft graphite lines, sitting at her window, cradling a book, bathed in imagined morning light. The detail was startling. But it was not the technique that broke her. It was the emotion. He had seen her, not just as a woman alone in a house, but as someone at peace, someone whole. The realization hit like a wave. In the few days they'd shared, Vincent had captured more of her truth than anyone ever had. Her tears came silently, not from loss, but from being truly seen. She wasn't grieving a man she barely knew. She was mourning a connection, an unexpected grace, a gift. Weeks passed, but the memory lingered, the drawing now framed and displayed on her bedroom wall like a sacred relic. Then one ordinary morning, among the stack of mundane mail, came a cream-colored envelope with her name in familiar ink. The note inside was brief. "If you still have the drawing, bring it. V." No explanation, no return address, but Evelyn didn't hesitate. She packed the sketch, left behind her routines, and followed the thread he had left. What she found wasn't closure, it was revelation. At the heart of a prestigious New York gallery, beneath soft lights and hushed voices, hung canvas after canvas of her. Her laughter, her sadness, her strength, moments she didn't even know he had witnessed, immortalized in paint. The exhibition was titled Her Light. Each painting radiated a reverence that startled her. It wasn't vanity she felt, it was awe. Vincent hadn't used her image as a tool for fame. He had used art to honor the light she didn't know she carried. And when he stepped forward that evening, addressing the crowd, he didn't speak about his comeback or artistic process. He spoke of her, of how a stranger's kindness had reignited something long extinguished. Evelyn listened, stunned and raw, as he told the world that it was she who had helped him remember who he was. And yet, after all that, Evelyn still couldn't shake her lingering doubt. Had he truly seen her, or merely found in her a spark to rekindle his craft? Was she a muse or a memory, an inspiration or something more? That question haunted her until she stepped into the quiet of the snowy street and heard her name. Vincent ran to her, breathless, coatless, eyes wide with the urgency of a man chasing not art but love. There, with snow falling between them and silence all around, he confessed the truth. that she hadn't just opened a door to her garage, but to her world, that she had given him something no critic or gallery ever could, a chance to be human again. And with trembling hands he gave her one final drawing, a sketch of them both side by side, wrapped in the soft glow of sunset, smiling faintly at one another. Not perfect, but real, just like the connection that had grown between them. Evelyn looked into his eyes, not as a muse, not as a symbol, but as a woman, seen, understood, and loved. And in that snowy silence, she stepped forward and embraced him. Because sometimes love doesn't come with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it arrives quietly in a folded blanket, a cup of cocoa, a garage full of snow, and it changes everything. As the days unfolded quietly in Evelyn's little home in Maple Hollow, something unexpected bloomed between her and Vincent. Not loud or sudden, but slow, like frost thawing into spring. They were two people shaped by pain, sharing silent breakfasts, stolen glances, and conversations wrapped in unspoken understanding. Though Vincent never spoke much about his past, it lingered in his eyes and his measured words. Evelyn could feel it, the weight he carried, the ghosts he had tried to outrun. But instead of prying, she offered presence. Her kindness wasn't performative, it was steady, patient, and real, and Vincent, once adrift, slowly allowed himself to rest, not just under her roof, but in her company. He helped her shovel snow without being asked, fixed a leaky tap without seeking thanks. He spoke to her like a man rediscovering the rhythm of a world he'd forgotten how to belong to. When the power went out one snowy night, Evelyn had expected only silence and solitude. Instead, there was a knock at her back door. Vincent, breath curling in the frozen air, offered help he didn't need to give. She invited him in, hesitantly, but when they sat together by the fireplace, wrapped in their own thoughts and the flicker of firelight, the last of her walls crumbled. That night, Evelyn shared her past, the betrayal that led her to Vermont, the heartbreak of losing the life she had planned. Vincent listened, not out of politeness, but with the quiet attentiveness of someone who had also known what it meant to fall apart. Then he opened up in turn, revealing he had once been someone people knew, someone whose name was whispered in art circles. But somewhere along the line he lost himself, buried under applause, expectation, and eventually despair. He had walked away from it all, searching not for fame but peace. Evelyn didn't react with shock or pity. She simply nodded. She saw not the artist, not the vanished prodigy, but the man sitting beside her, gentle, bruised, and trying. Their connection was not built on grand declarations, but small truths. A shared cup of cocoa, a joke passed over toast. A glance held longer than expected, and in those moments, something profound took root. Evelyn began to feel again, feel seen, valued, hopeful. And Vincent, for the first time in years, felt inspired, not by critics or prestige, but by the stillness and strength he saw in her. Every time he looked at Evelyn, he didn't see a subject. He saw a sanctuary. Then, without warning, he was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just the scarf she had given him, folded neatly, and a single drawing, a portrait of her, peaceful and reading by the window. She grieved not because of what could have been, but because of what had already been shared and left unsaid. But weeks later the invitation came, a note in familiar handwriting asking her to bring the drawing, and when she entered the gallery in New York, her breath caught. Painting after painting, all of her expressions, her solitude, her strength. She had been his muse, yes, but more than that, his reason to create again. And in that moment, Evelyn realized that Vincent hadn't just painted her face. He had painted her soul. When he saw her in the crowd and stepped forward to speak, he didn't talk about art. He spoke about her, about the woman who opened her garage and gave him warmth without question, who reminded him of humanity, of hope. His confession to the crowd was heartfelt, but the moment that mattered was when he turned to her, eyes filled with apology and longing, and told her the truth. She had helped him find himself. And he wanted to be with her, not as an artist with a muse, but as a man with the woman who had seen him when no one else had. Outside in the snow, under the soft hush of falling flakes, Evelyn finally got the answer she didn't even know she'd been waiting for. Vincent loved her, not just her image, not just her kindness, but all of her, And with a final drawing in her hand and the real man standing before her, Evelyn embraced the next chapter of their story, not as strangers, but as soulmates who had found each other when they both needed it most. When Evelyn stepped into the gallery that night, nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to witness. The sign above the door read, "Her Light, a Solo Exhibition by Vic." But she had no idea it would be her light that had inspired every brushstroke, every canvas, every silent murmur of admiration echoing through the room. The moment she entered, it was as if time had slowed. Her breath caught in her throat. On the walls were paintings, dozens of them, each one of her, but not just her appearance. They captured her essence, quiet strength, aching vulnerability, glimpses of joy she had long forgotten. There she was, standing by her window, wrapped in morning sunlight. There again, crossing the snowy street, face tilted up as flakes danced around her. And again, curled in her armchair, reading by candlelight, her expression softened by peace. These weren't just portraits. They were windows into her soul. As Evelyn moved from one canvas to another, the whispers around her faded. She felt like a ghost among the living, her past laid bare for strangers to admire. But the feeling wasn't embarrassment, it was awe, wonder, and an ache so deep it almost buckled her knees. He had seen her, truly seen her. In moments she thought were private, even invisible, Vincent had not only noticed, he had remembered. He had preserved them in paint and light and line, in a way that felt reverent, not exploitative. She realized then that their connection had been more than fleeting. While she had questioned whether she had been just a muse, an image for him to use and discard, these paintings told a different story. They spoke of admiration, of longing, of a tenderness that went beyond inspiration. They told her story, her quiet resilience, her journey through heartbreak, her slow rediscovery of self. And then, from the edge of the room, came his voice. Vincent stepped into the light, no longer the ragged man she once found in her garage, but not entirely transformed either. The suit was new, the beard trimmed, the posture more confident. But his eyes remained the same, still tired, still searching, still full of her. He spoke gently, sincerely, confessing to the crowd how he had once been a man consumed by success, empty of purpose, how her one act of kindness, a simple gesture of shelter, had given him a second chance at not only art but at feeling, living, and loving again. He didn't name her directly, but the room knew. All eyes turned toward Evelyn, yet she could hardly move. His words reached her not as praise, but as truth. She had saved him in a way neither of them had understood at the time. Later, as the crowd murmured and the lights glowed warm behind her, Evelyn found herself outside, snow falling gently, her heart heavy with the weight of emotion. That was when he called her name, soft, uncertain, and full of hope. Vincent came running through the snow, breathless, eyes desperate. And there, in the quiet street, he told her the words that mattered most, not to the crowd, not as the artist, but as the man. He had run not because he didn't care, but because he had cared too much. He was afraid of destroying something good, something real. But now, he wanted a second chance. Not as muse and painter, but as two people who had found healing in each other. He handed her a final drawing, one he had nearly kept hidden. The two of them standing together at sunset in front of the garage, smiling gently toward each other. It was imperfect, he said, but it was real. Evelyn looked at the drawing, then back at him, and suddenly, all the questions she had, about his feelings, about her worth, about whether she was merely a symbol, melted in the warmth of that moment. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, and finally allowed herself to believe in love again. Not because he had painted her, but because he had seen her. Not because he had spoken to the world, but because he had whispered to her soul. In that embrace, beneath the snow and the quiet hum of the city, they began not just a romance, but a redemption. Together they would write a new story, one not born in a gallery, but in a garage where kindness sparked the miracle of being seen. The morning Evelyn discovered the garage empty, something inside her unraveled. She had awoken with a strange stillness, the kind that often follows a dream too real to forget. There was no mug of cocoa waiting on the steps, no soft scrape of movement from the garage, no signs of him, Vincent. Her heart sank before her mind had even confirmed it. She stepped out into the cold snow crunching beneath her slippers and pulled open the garage door. Nothing. The corner he had claimed was bare, the tarp folded and gone, no boots, no blanket. But there, placed with delicate intention, was the scarf she had given him. Folded neatly beside it, a drawing held down by a small stone. Evelyn's hands trembled as she lifted the paper, and when she saw what he'd left behind, her breath caught in her throat. It was her. A portrait sketched in tender graphite, her curled up in her chair, bathed in imagined sunlight, a book open in her lap, and the softest smile gracing her face. The detail was extraordinary, not just in technical skill, but in emotion. He had captured something she didn't even know she'd been showing: peace, grace, and quiet strength. As Evelyn sat there in the garage, clutching the drawing, tears spilled freely. He had seen her, not just as a passerby, not just a woman who had shown him kindness, but as someone real. Someone worth remembering, and that, she realized, was why it hurt so much. Because he had left without goodbye, without explanation, and yet he had left this behind, a fragment of his soul, and proof that hers had been witnessed. In the following days, life continued in still rhythm, but she found herself constantly drawn back to the sketch. She framed it, placed it on her nightstand, stared at it every evening as if hoping it might speak. When the letter came, an envelope with her name in handwriting, she knew instantly. Her heart leapt and shattered all at once. "If you still have the drawing, bring it. V." That was all it said. No return address, no time, no place. But the meaning was clear. He was reaching out. Evelyn's world tilted. She paced, questioned, doubted. Was this closure, a cruel joke, or something more? But even as fear crept in, her soul whispered what she already knew. She had to go, because what they had shared in silence, in cocoa, in fleeting glances and long nights by the fire, it had mattered. It had changed her. She packed the drawing and boarded a train to New York, destination unknown but heart certain. And when she stepped into that gallery and saw herself staring back from every canvas, she finally understood. Vincent hadn't just painted her face. He had poured every moment of their time together onto those walls, her stillness, her sadness, her healing, each brushstroke a testament to the days they shared. And in doing so, he had given her back parts of herself she hadn't realized were missing. But still, she left in silence, overwhelmed, breathless, and unsure what any of it meant. Was she simply his muse, a source of inspiration in a dark time, or something more? The answer came not in another painting, but in the snow-covered street when Vincent ran after her, breathless and raw, holding out a package and a heart full of truth. He told her that the garage hadn't just been shelter, it had been sanctuary, that in her quiet kindness he found the strength to see again, to feel again, and to love. He confessed his fear, his guilt, and finally his desire, not for a subject or a symbol, but for her. As he handed her a final sketch, the two of them standing in front of the garage, sunset behind them, faces turned slightly toward each other in contented peace. Her doubts melted. She saw not just art, but a future. And in that moment, Evelyn understood. She had not been left behind. She had been honored. Their embrace under a soft veil of snow sealed what words could not. It was not a perfect love story, too raw, too real for that. But it was a true one, born not from grand gestures, but from shared silences, from pain acknowledged and kindness exchanged. And the garage, once a symbol of brokenness and escape, now stood as the place where their healing began, where two lost souls found each other and themselves, in the quiet spaces between words, between walls, between heartbeats. Let me know if you'd like the final lesson and call to action version based on this, or help with the next summary. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin in silence, in the spaces where words aren't spoken but hearts are understood. In this story, we see Evelyn, a woman rebuilding herself after heartbreak, and Vincent, a man who walked away from fame because it had stolen his soul. Neither of them were looking for salvation. Yet when she offered him one night of shelter in her garage, that small act of humanity changed everything. Vincent wasn't just a homeless stranger. He was a man full of stories, grief, and forgotten beauty. And Evelyn was. What makes this story so powerful is that it reminds us we are all more than our circumstances. Sometimes all it takes is one person seeing you, not for what you've lost, but for who you still are, for healing to begin. Evelyn didn't need to know Vincent's past to show him kindness. And in return, Vincent gave her something no one else had in years, a true reflection of her worth. Let this be your reminder that even in your lowest moments you are still worthy of love, of art, of being seen. And if you ever get the chance to offer someone a moment of grace, take it. It might just change both your lives. If this story touched you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories like this. Your support means the world to us.